Surviving the Applewhites, Chapter 26. Jake had found a crumpled cigarette in the bottom of his duffel bag and had gone out into the woods to smoke it, Winston tagging loyally along. It hadn't helped. He realized with considerable shock that he didn't really like the taste of smoking left in his mouth, that he'd never liked it. After 2 drags, he crushed out the cigarette. He swore. He kicked the trunk of a tree. He imagined a house, Miss Montrose's house, going up in flames, the Treybridge Little Theater blowing up and then settling in a cloud of dust like those buildings they showed being demolished on television. Winston had flopped down a considerable distance away and was eyeing him warily. Okay, he said to the dog. I probably wouldn't do those things if I could. The dog came no closer. Let's walk. When the 2 of them got back, having wandered the whole of Wits End, the barn doors were open, and the cars had been moved out into the driveway. Zebediah, riding the lawnmower, was coming out, while Archie and someone Jake had never seen before were going in, carrying a stack of 2x4s. Cordelia and Lucille, both with handkerchiefs tied over their hair, were coming from the main house, carrying brooms, mops, and buckets. Jake felt a kind of electricity in the air that was how it must be when an army was getting ready for an all-out assault. Go to the schoolroom and get your assignment, Cordelia called to him. I think you're supposed to be helping Archie and Hal. Archie and Hal? That stranger whose back he had seen going into the barn must have been Hal. Out of his room and into the daylight. He stood for a moment watching the barn doors, and soon the 2 came out again. Hal was just about Jake's size, dressed as Jake was in black boots, black pants, and a black turtleneck. His long reddish-brown hair was pulled back into a ponytail, and he sported a goatee that was a scragglier replica of Randolph's. Hal Applewhite, 15-year-old sculptor, looked like a cross between his father and his older sister, except that he had a really bad case of acne. Whatever was going on, Jake thought, it must be big to bring Hal out. Very, very big. Over the next 10 days, it turned out to be bigger than Jake could have imagined. The show would go on if it took everyone's dying breath to make it happen. Every member of the cast agreed to stay with the show. For most of them, what changed was little more than geography. Instead of going to Treybridge for rehearsals, they now came to Wits End. What changed for the Applewhites was something else again. Jake had thought that he knew something about the Applewhites and Passion, but nothing had prepared him for what happened when all of them, all at the same time, became totally obsessed with the same thing. What had seemed like hard work before now looked like a sort of happy, restful vacation. Gone was any consideration of larks and owls. Work went on day and night. Sleep was relegated to a nap here or there. Jake gave up on his hair altogether. He needed every moment of sleep he could get. He barely had time for showers, let alone gelling his hair into points. The whole of Wits End was transformed. The barn became command central, where the basic work of creating a theater from scratch went on. Trucks delivered rented folding chairs, rented borrowed or scavenged lighting and sound equipment, and lumber. Lots and lots of lumber. At the end of the barn a stage was built, and the loft became the light and sound booth. Wisteria Cottage became the costume shop, with Jake's room serving as dressing room and costume storage. Jake was given a cot in Zebediah's cottage, where he and Winston shared the living room with Polly. The wood shop, of course, was the scene shop. Rehearsals were held in the dance studio. Destiny was moved in with Hal to free up his room, and Govindaswamy and Bernstein doubled up in Dogwood Cottage so that Sweetgum Cottage could be turned into a kind of dormitory to house the people who showed up to lend a hand. It seemed that Randolph knew an almost infinite number of theater people who were between jobs at any given moment. They came in waves, staying for as many days as they could spare and seeming every bit as obsessed while they were there as the Applewhites. Govindaswamy continued to cook, But no longer did work stop for meals. He took the food to the barn, to the woodshop, to Wisteria Cottage, to wherever people were at work with the help of Destiny and his red wagon. The delivery man from the lumber yard, who happened to arrive one day when shrimp vindaloo was being set out on a plank between two sawhorses, fell instantly in love with Indian cuisine. He ate 2 plates full and then came back when his delivery shift was over to help, bringing 2 friends with him. In return for all they could eat of whatever dinner was being served, the 3 of them came back for 4 days in a row to build risers to accommodate folding chairs for an audience of 150. There was something for everyone to do, including Destiny, who became kind of a messenger and delivery service, scurrying all over Wits End with his wagon, talking or singing nonstop as he went. Sybil and Jeremy took over marketing and publicity, writing press releases and churning out advertising curriculars that labeled the production the most exciting piece of musical theater ever to appear on a North Carolina stage. Jake did a little of everything. One moment he would be helping to build the stage, the next he would be hanging lights or running cables. For 2 days he and Zedediah scoured the countryside for props, and he found himself learning what could have been found in an Austrian household in the 1930s and what could not. It took half a day of going from antique shop to flea market to used furniture store to find the right sort of telephone for the Von Trapp living room. The owner of the shop where they finally found it had read about the production in the newspaper and agreed to let them borrow it in return for a pair of tickets to opening night. Mrs. Montrose had called the Treybridge paper to announce the cancellation of the show a moment after she'd spoken to Randolph. The reporter had called Randolph to get his side, and the story had been growing ever since. It was picked up by newspapers across the state. And then television news reporters began showing up with camera crews and getting underfoot. 2 versions had begun to emerge, each with its own hero and its own villain. One had Randolph Applewhite as a crusading New York radical attempting to destroy the grand old traditions of the South, while Mrs. Montrose staunchly defended them. The other called Randolph a symbol of the broadening culture of the New South and Mrs. Montrose a throwback to the bad old days. "They're turning it from an artistic story into a political one," Randolph complained. "Publicity is publicity," Bernstein said. "The important thing is to fill the seats." One gray and drizzly afternoon, Jake was coming out of the barn with a light that had a broken clamp when a reporter stopped him. "You're the kid who burned down a school in Rhode Island, aren't you? Did you have anything to do with the fire at the Treybridge Little Theater?" "No comment," Jake said, and ducked back into the barn.